Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz musician, producer, and writer Samir Zarif. We caught up with this Houston-born musician at the beginning of the COVID-19 quarantine of late March 2020 to talk about his new CD called Lineage. Also known as FKAjazz, he moved to New York in the early 2000s to attend the Manhattan School of Music, and he got a decade of experience as a touring musician. And over the years, he's had a great journey. So please dig this interview.
Thanks for taking a minute out today.
Of course, man. My pleasure. And plus, I'm cooped up in the house anyway, so.
Well, my philosophy, when this all started, it was like, I think everybody went through the shock, and it's at a point now where I just was thinking, if there's anything that probably would be an oasis for everybody involved, would be to take a break from what's going on to talk about music.
Yeah, of course, man. Of course.
And your CD came in the mail probably the day or the day after the big announcement. So I had some quality time. I had some quality time to listen to it. I guess we could really genuinely redo our calculations of time here. BC can become before Coronas.
That's funny, man.
Just popped into my head. So at any rate, I really enjoyed listening to the album. I think it's really important for jazz to find that leverage between the modern world of music and the old school underpinnings of what jazz has always kind of been. Not that it's ever had a fence around it, but that's the way it is. So talk to me a little bit about Lineage and how you feel about this album and what your approach was.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, so in 2017 is kind of when I started FKAjazz and kind of departed from the kind of idea of me just being a jazz musician, kind of long before that, but it was really that was kind of a rebirth, if you will. And in 2017, I put out a record called Stereotype Threat. 2 years later, last year, I put out another album. And yeah, man, I just realized, because I love producing, but what ended up happening was I was doing a lot of producing and not as much saxophone playing in my records. And then when I would do performances with my collective, I found myself not playing as much saxophone as I wanted to. So Lineage was kind of like a way in which I could really kind of go back and revisit doing saxophone, or basically saxophone inclusive music that really kind of centered around the saxophone as the lead versus a voice, and which I use in a lot of my other records. And so yeah, man, it was a really great opportunity to kind of stretch out, in a way, kind of remind people that yeah, I'm a producer, but at the same time I'm very much a saxophonist, and although I'm not as much on the jazz scene as I used to be, I still, play with a lot of my great friends like E.J. Strickland and Hans Glavishnik, all of these really great dudes. But, it's really spotty as, now I'm kind of leading this collective and this kind of thing. So Lineage was really okay, let me just take a step back, really stretch out on the saxophone and, do some music that was really something that I felt would paint a picture for people to kind of create their own storyline behind. And sometimes when words are in the music, it kind of gets in the way of other people's imagination. So I thought it would be really interesting to do more instrumental type music as well.
So you're originally from Houston,
Yeah.
which is a pretty big cauldron of the arts. Talk to me a little bit about your childhood and how you got into music.
Oh, word. Well, yeah. So I started playing piano. Like when I was like 3 years old. I think was the first lesson I got. My mom, she was a classically trained pianist, and both of my siblings that I grew up with, they were also in the arts as well. My sister's like a Grammy-winning cellist, and my brother, he's a mathematician now. But it's the same side of the brain. But anyway, like I basically grew up in music schools, went to this arts high school called HSPVA, High School for Performing and Visual Arts, where I got to meet people like Robert Glasper and Walter Smith and Kendrick Scott, and the list goes on. Basically anyone out of Houston that you could think of pretty much went to this school, and I had the pleasure of going there. And yeah, I mean, the thing with Houston was, at least at the time, I'm not really sure now, but at least at the time, it was really kind of after high school, it was kind of like, you kind of needed to go somewhere else to really start your career in the jazz world. And a lot of my peers went to New York first. I was one of the few that went to New Orleans first instead, where I, studied at the University in New Orleans, and then came up here to New York.
Talk to me a little bit about, when you did start become a professional musician, and especially in New York, it's such a big scene. What was kind of that breaking in period like for you?
I would say that a lot of people, because I've been here for 15 years now, man. So I've seen a lot of people come and go, people that have been able to come to New York and thrive, people that were not and had to like go back to where they were, or they decided to as a pursuit of something else. But for me, I came here, I did grad school at Manhattan School of Music. So that was kind of my kind of inauguration into the jazz scene, if you will. Really, like the first year I was here, I was just kind of in school, like very much inundated with like school itself. But then at the same time, being here, in the program I was in, I quickly built a community of musicians, people kind of in the same boat as me, a lot of people from all parts of the world, really coming together to see what this New York thing is like. And, that's where I got to meet people like Ambrose Akinmersery and a lot of great dudes. Justin Brown was at the school with me. A lot of people, Michael Alatuja. So I really was able to create a really nice network of beautiful people that were around me making beautiful music. And then I fell in love with the city right away, and so decided to stay. And 15 years later, here I am.
You've probably seen a lot of things happen in New York City over that time. And
most definitely.
And I'm sure now is probably one of, along with everyone around the world, it's probably one of the times that no generation has ever seen. So my question to you, and it's kind of been my question since the whole thing has kind of started here, is what do you hope the audience or the collective masses start getting from art that they may not have gotten before this happened?
I mean, I that's a really interesting question, because what I feel like I'm starting to see now that people are really cooped up and especially in New York. New York is kind of on lockdown right now. You're not really allowed to go anywhere other than the grocery store. So it's kind of a serious deal here. And the one thing that I feel people might have taken for granted, especially in New York, where there's just so much culture here. But I think people before, BC, before Corona, I think people were kind of maybe just not aware of how important music or culture in general was to them. And now that that's kind of been stripped away from people in a way, I'm starting to see, at least for instance, on my Instagram, a lot more engagement, people really kind of hungry for more and more music. And I think that's, in a way, it kind of, I think things like this allow people to remember what's important, and I think one of the things that, people take for granted or people don't realize that is very important in their life is the culture around it. I think people get very much in their head about making money, and people get very much in their head about, just surviving, especially in a city like New York where everything is very expensive. So now that's kind of been stripped away and people are kind of just stuck at home and really doing their best to just figure stuff out. It's really the light at the end of the tunnel, seems really far. And what's getting people through is the amount of creative, output that's coming out right now, where people are just putting out great music, people are putting out great content, great art. And, that's kind of getting people through in such a deep way, I think. So yeah, man, definitely.
What do you want the listener to get from this album, from this experience that you've put out with Lineage?
Man, I just want people to really expand their minds, I think one of the kind of subliminal tricks that I had was I put out a lot of hip hop and R&B type music prior to this, so a lot of my fan base are people that normally listen to hip hop and R&B, and now I've hit them with this jazz record, if you will, and in a way I'm exposing them to something that they probably wouldn't have heard any other way than for me to have taken them on this journey. So in that way, I'm really hoping that the people that have kind of been on this FKAjazz ride with me from day one have in a way expanded their spectrum as to what they understand as good music. For jazz fans out there, people that listen to jazz, in a way, it's kind of the opposite effect, because the music is so, so rich in the culture of not just jazz, but funk and R&B and, hip hop, that, it really even though it's instrumental music, it spans through a very wide diaspora, if you will. That in the same way, they also expand their perspective and their ideas of what jazz is, or what, Black American music is. And then, right down the middle, just speaking from the music itself, the two kind of pieces there, Like Water in the Spirit and Inner Peace, are both, songs that really represent a very fundamental thing in my life, is that, for the past 16 years I've been a Buddhist. And the concepts of the music and the kind of subtle lyrics, inside of the music. Those things really represent a certain type of perspective that I've been learning through practicing Buddhism. So without saying too much, I just want people to like really kind of feel the energy of what inner peace really is, what, the idea of a spirit, like a flow, the like water in the spirit, basically meaning like, a strong spirit is like water, not like fire, for instance. So I mean, it's very layered, I'd say, from that perspective. But so there's a lot that people can get from listening to Lineage. But I think at the end of the day, I just want people to enjoy and to, have something that can help them get through another day, another like kind of just period of our time where we're kind of like just inundated with some challenging times, you know what I mean? So yeah.
Cool. So I got one more question for you, and it's this. Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, coworkers, but you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
Man, I'm still trying to figure that out. I have no idea. I know the most important thing for me is that I'm a good person, that I, have been working just as hard on being a good person as I am on being good to other people, and also like, one of the reasons why I even started my collective, True Culture, for instance, is because, I really wanted to be in a position where I could simultaneously, really help my own career, but then simultaneously help the career of people that I felt were super talented but hadn't had the right opportunities yet. And so, for instance, Justin Sweeney, who's the drummer in my collective and band, was at the time I met him, a young kid, just like looking to get on the scene. And I quickly scooped him up and was like, let's make music together. Noah McNeil, who I've known the longest in the collective, who's a great pianist, but, it's just like, hasn't really, really made a name for himself. So I'm like, what can I do to help you, And so, when it comes down to who I am or who I want people to think I am, whatnot, just that, like, I'm a giving, good person. Bottom line, that's all I care about.
Right on. That's a great answer, man. Hey, thanks for taking some time out today to talk about the music. It's been wonderful, man.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Houston, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the globe, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Samir for his time and his music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, support the arts and dig the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.